Hey everyone, welcome to part 40 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we will start implementing scene management. So we'll create a portal game object which can be used to switch between scenes. And we'll also create a system for triggering some code on a game object when the player steps on it. So we'll do all the setup that we need for scene management, and the actual scene switching will be implemented in the next video. Special thanks to all my Patreons for making the series possible. By becoming a Patreon, you can support me in the making of the series and get access to some cool rewards like the complete project files of the series, which also contains some advanced features that are not covered here. So let's start the video. So first, let me add some fences around the scene so that player won't be able to go out of it. So under the grid, I'll select the solid objects and I'll go to the tile palette. So this is the fence that I want to draw. So first I'll draw the corner pieces. Alright, and then I'll just fill the rest. Alright, so if you test the game now, the player shouldn't be able to go out of the scene. Alright, so he can only walk till here and the fence will block him. So next, let's remove few fences here. So I'll take the eraser and remove few fences at the middle. So this will be the path through which the player can go to the next scene. Alright, so what we have to do is we have to create a portal game object that will take the player to the next scene when the player steps on it. Alright, we have to create a portal game object and we have to add it over here. So I'll create a new game object called portal. Okay, let me reset its position. And I'll add a box collider 2D on it. Okay, let me double click on the portal to focus on it. So this will be our portal. So I'll move it up towards our opening. Alright, I'll place it over here and I'll change the X size of the box collider to 2 so that it matches the opening. Alright, that looks fine. So now, since the portal doesn't have any visual game object, it'll be hard for us to understand that we have placed a portal over here, right? There is nothing visual in it. So what we can do is we can change the icon of our portal game object. So we can click over here and we can just select the icon from here. Alright, so now in the scene we can see that there is a portal over here. So next, in the box collider settings, I'll turn on this trigger checkbox. Since we don't want this to be a collider, we want this to be a trigger, right? So now when the player enters the portal, we should detect it and switch scenes, right? So let's create a script in order to do that. So inside scripts, I'll create a new folder called scene management. Okay, and in here I'll create a new script called portal. Alright, let me open this up. So usually to check if a game object entered a trigger, we use a function called on trigger enter 2D. So when any game object enters this trigger, this function will be called. But we can't use this approach for a tile-based game. The reason is because we don't want to trigger the code as soon as the player enters the trigger, right? We only want to do that once the player reaches the center of the tile that has the trigger. Alright, so if we use this, it's going to look weird. So let me remove this. And until now, we have been doing this using a different approach. So if you go inside player controller, once the player finish moving to a certain tile, we will call this function called onMoveOver. And inside onMoveOver, we will check if the player entered any triggerable objects. So here we are checking for two objects. First one is the long grass. So the way we are checking is we create an overlap circle and we check if there is a long grass object in that overlap circle. And similarly, we are also checking if the player entered the trainer's field of view. Alright, so we can use the same approach to check if the player entered the portal, but I want to clean this approach a little bit. So the one problem with this approach is all the logic like checking for collision with the long grass and with the field of view, all that is inside the player controller script itself, right? And now if we introduce portal, even that code will be inside the player controller. So this is not a clean way of doing it. Writing all these logic inside player controller will make it less reusable. And another problem is we will have to create an overlap circle for all the triggerable objects, right? Right now we only have two, but let's say if we have 10 types of triggerable objects, then for each one of them, we'll have to create an overlap circle. So to clean this up, we can use the same approach we used for the interactable objects. All right. So here we have an interface called interactable, and all the interactable objects like NPCs and trainers and all will implement this interactable interface, right? So if we go to the NPC controller, you can see that it's implementing the interactable interface. So we can use the same approach for all the triggerable objects. All right. So first let's create a new interface for it. So inside my scripts, inside gameplay, I'll create a new C# script called iPlayer Triggerable. Okay, so let me open this up. And this is not going to be a class. Instead, it's going to be an interface. So let's define a function inside this. So I'll define a function called onPlayerTriggered. Okay, and this function will take player controller as a parameter. So all the game objects that needs to be triggered by the player will implement this interface. So first let's test this on portal. So the portal should implement iPlayer Triggerable interface. And right now we're getting an error since we haven't created the implementation for the function. So I'll use control dot to implement that. Okay, so when the player enters the portal, we should switch the scenes, but we'll be doing that in the next video. For now, let's just write a log statement. Okay, so now in the player controller script inside onMoveOver, I'm going to remove the calls to these functions because we don't need them anymore, and instead I'm going to create an overlap circle. Okay, and when creating the overlap circle, we need to pass all the triggerable layers, right? So all the layers like grass and train FOV and portal should be passed. So first of all, let's create a layer for the portal. So I'll go to Unity and I'll create a new layer called portal. Okay, and then I'll assign it to our portal game object. Okay, so next we need to assign the portal layer in our game layer script. Let me just comment this line here so it doesn't cause an error. And let me go to the game layer script. In here, I'll create a new layer called the portal layer. Okay, and I'll also create a property to return that. And let me also create a property that will return all the triggerable layers. So it'll be easy for us to get all of them. Okay, so the triggerable layers are grass layer, the FOV layer, and the portal layer. Alright, we can combine all these layers by using the bitwise OR operator. So now let's go to Unity and assign the portal layer in our game layer script. Alright, so now we can go to our player controller script, and while creating the overlap circle, we can simply pass gamelayers.i.triggerable layers. Okay, so let me store the result of this in a variable called triggerables. And by the way, when we use overlap circle, it will only return the first game object with which it overlapped, right? But in this case, we want all the game objects with which it overlapped. So for that, what we can do is we can use overlap circle all function. Okay, so if you look here, it's returning an array of colliders. So since it's returning an array, we have to loop through it. So I'll create a for each loop. Okay, actually let me just rename this to colliders since it's an instance of collider 2D. Okay, so I'll rename this to colliders, and this will be collider. So next we need to check if the overlapped game object contains an I player triggerable script. So we can say collider.getComponent I player triggerable. Okay, and I'll store this in a variable called triggerable. And if it's not equal to null, it means the game object actually has an I player triggerable interface. So in that case, we can call triggerable dot on player triggered. Okay, so for the player controller, I'll just pass this, and after that I'll break out of the loop. Okay, so now since portal is implementing this interface, this function should be called when the player steps on a portal. So let's test that. Okay, so if I step on the portal, oops, nothing happens. I found the issue. It's because we forgot to attach the portal script into the portal game object. So let's do that and test again. Okay, so now we can see that when we enter the portal, this is being printed. So our triggerable system is working properly. So next, let's use the same approach for the long grass and the trainer field of view. So just like we did for the portal, we'll have to create separate scripts for long grass and trainer FOV. So inside scripts, inside the gameplay folder, I'll create a new script called long grass. Okay. And we need to attach this script onto the long grass object under grid. So let me do that. All right, so let me open up this script. So this script will implement the iPlayerTrigger triggerable interface. Okay, just like we did for the portal. So let me use control dot to implement the onPlayerTriggered method. And now we can move the logic to start while battle from the player controller to the long grass script. So right now the logic is inside this function. So I'll just copy this and paste it inside my onPlayerTriggered function. So inside the player controller, we were using an event to trigger while battles. So this is because we don't want direct dependency between player and game controller. So if you look at the game controller, you can see that when on encounter event is triggered, we are calling the start battle function. All right. So from the long grass script, we don't have to use an event. We can directly call start battle. I don't mind having a dependency between long grass and game controller. So instead of triggering the event, I'll say game controller dot instance dot start battle. We don't see start battle over here. So if we go to game controller, it's because start battle is not public. So let's make it public. And now you should be able to see it over here. All right, so let's call it. So here, another thing that we were doing is we were setting the isMoving parameter of the animator to false, since we don't want the player to keep walking when we trigger a battle, right? We are doing the same for trainer battles also. So what I'm going to do is I'll call this line before we call triggerable dot on player triggered function. Okay, so in this way we won't have to call that from all our scripts like long grass and trainer FOV and portal and all that. We just have to call it once from here. Okay, so now we can remove this line from here. And now we can go to player controller and we can remove the check for encounters logic from here. Okay. So next, let's also change the trainer FOV checking logic into a separate script. So inside my scripts folder, inside character, I'll create another script called trainer FOV. Okay, and we need to attach it to the FOV game object of the trainer. And by the way, if you have multiple trainers, you'll have to attach it to each one of them because we don't have a prefab right now. Soon we'll convert all these things into prefabs so we can avoid cases like these. So anyway, I only need to attach it to the single trainer that I have. So let me open up the script, and the script is also going to implement iPlayer triggerable interface. And let me implement the onPlayer triggered function. So inside the player controller, we were calling an event called on trainers view, just like we did for on encountered. and inside the game controller, when this event is triggered, this function will be called. But it's not practical to create an event like that from the trainer FOV. The problem is, in the case of player controller, there will only be one player, right? But in the case of trainer, there will be multiple trainers across different scenes. So we'll have to listen to the events from all the different trainers. So let's drop this event approach when calling it from trainer FOV. So instead we can change this lambda into a public function and call that directly. So here, let me create a public function, call on enter trainers view. Okay, so we'll be calling this function from the trainer FOV, and when we are calling it from here, we can directly pass a reference to the trainer controller. So this function can take a reference of trainer controller. Okay, so now we can move this logic into our new function. Okay, so now from the trainer FOV, we can call game controller dot instance dot on enter trainers view, the function we created now. And to pass the trainer controller, we can't directly use get component. Instead, we'll have to use get component in parent. So this is because the trainer controller script is not inside the FOV, but it's inside trainer, which is a parent game object. So we'll have to use get component in parent, and we need to get the trainer controller. Okay, so that's all we have to do. So basically we dropped the event approach and we started using public functions instead. So since we are not using this event anymore, let's remove the unused code and make things clean. So next, we are also not using the on encountered event. Instead, we are directly calling it from the long grass. So let's also remove this code. All right. And in the player controller, we can remove the definitions of these events. And we can also remove the check in trainers view function, since we are handling it from trainer FOV. So yeah, we are done with our new approach. I think this approach is much more cleaner. We removed a lot of code from the player controller and moved it to the trainer FOV and long grass script. And now we are only creating a single overlap circle instead of creating one for all triggerable objects. So let's go ahead and test if this approach is working. So let me try walking through the grass. Okay, so that's working correctly. We can start battles just like before. So let me just run from this battle and test if the trainer FOV is working. So if I go step on trainer FOV, so you can see that it's working just like before. So our new system to trigger game objects is working properly. So I'll stop the video here, and in the next video, we'll look at how to change the scene when the player steps on the portal. So before you leave, if you think these videos are helpful, please make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. That'll really help me out. So I'll see you in the next video.